Shabbat Shalom. It is the counting of the Omer. We're in the 13th day of the counting of the Omer. We're going to talk about that. The counting of the Omer is a problem. It's a big problem. And we're going to talk about that, the timing of the counting of the Omer, when it gets started. So today I'm going to start a series on the counting of the Omer, Spirat HaOmer, and the 5 gifts, the 5 matanot, or gifts. They're called 5 ministry gifts in Christianity. This is a Jewish doctrine that comes right out of this time period, the counting of the Omer. So I'm going to talk about that. Today is just an intro. I'm going to go through all 5 gifts through the counting of the Omer as we're counting the Omer. And by the time we get to Shavuot, at the end of the counting of the Omer, we will have gone through all 5 gifts. Now, I don't teach the 5 gifts probably like you've ever heard before, because I teach it from Judaism. I don't really know anything about Christianity, although I've heard all the doctrines about the 5 gifts. I've heard them all, and I've heard. I know what people are teaching. I know what's out there. I know what's been out there since the 80s. But I had this taught to me from Judaism, from Scripture. So we're gonna look at 2 passages. Now, the name of the teaching is Counting the Omer to Know God. We're also doing a series, it seems like, since we started the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, that we are looking at knowing God. That this is all about knowing God, and knowing God is not something that just happens. It's something that happens slowly over time. And we're talking about, as we do the counting of the Omer and as we look at the 5 gifts, we're going to be talking about knowing God again. That's why it's called Counting the Omer to Know God. So Leviticus 23 is one of the passages. The other one is in Ephesians chapter 4. Leviticus 23, 15 through 16, and then verse 21. You shall also count for yourselves from the day after the Shabbat, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, there shall be 7 complete Sabbaths, or Shabbatot. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Shabbat. Then you shall present a new grain offering to the Lord. On this same day, that being the 50th day, you shall make a proclamation. You are to have a holy rehearsal, a mikra kodesh. You shall do no laborious work. It is to be a perpetual statute in all your dwelling places throughout your generations. And as I've said many, many times before, you cannot do Judaism from the Bible. The Bible doesn't tell you how to do things. The Bible doesn't tell you how to wrap tzitzit. It simply says, Numbers 15:30, 8 through 41, it says put fringes with blue in them on the arba kanfot, 4 corners of your garments. Well, what does that look like? How do you do it? How long should the fringes be? How many knots? How many windings? Why are there knots? Why are there windings? And, it goes on and on and on and on. So that's what the Mishnah and the Talmud are for, to explain to us how things are done. These books here are the Mishnah. There are 6 volumes of the Mishnah. And they tell us how things looked and how things were done. So we don't have to guess about it. Now, the how to do these 7 weeks is the counting of the Omer. From the how-to of the counting of the Omer, Sha'ul, Paul, taught in Ephesians chapter 4 about this. So, what does it mean? What's it a picture of? What are we supposed to know from the counting of the Omer? Why do we do it? Why did God give us this? As we're doing it, what are we supposed to learn? All right. So this is from Ephesians 4, 4 through 13. There is one body and one ruach, just as you also were called in the one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one immersion, one God and Father. For the first time in my life, I saw those verses a few days ago. Never saw it before. And it sets us up to read about the counting of the Omer, and I never saw it. There's 7 things. The counting of the Omer is 7 weeks. It's all about Shabbat, 7th day, 7 times 7. And it's all about 7s. Well, here we start out with 7. One body, one Spirit, one tikva, hope of your calling, one Lord, one emunah, faith, one mikvah, immersion, one God and Father. There's 7 ones. There's 7 things that are echad, that are one. And so our mind, and I never saw it before, I admit it. I mean, I've read this 1,000 times probably, and I've never seen it. So for the first time, I finally saw the intro to the understanding of this passage. We're supposed to be thinking 7, and you're supposed to count these things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, there's 7 of them. I'm thinking 7s. But to each one of us, grace or gift was given according to the measure of Messiah's gift or grace. Therefore, it says, when he ascended on high, he led captive a host of captives and gave gifts to men, that he might fill all things. And he gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers for the equipping of the holy ones, to the building up of the body of Messiah, until we all attain to the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Messiah. There's far too many words here. It's too many, it's too much. I mean, everybody gets lost reading this passage. So what we have to do is we have to parse this out, and we'll do that eventually. We have to parse this out into little bits to try to find what in the world is Sha'ul talking about. And what I'm going to show you is that what in the world Sha'ul is talking about is very clear and specific and really revelatory. It's really gives us a very clear image of what God was sticking in this book for us. But it's hard when you're reading this to see that. It really is. So let's talk about counting of the Omer. These verses, you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, there shall be 7 complete Sabbaths. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. What does that mean? In Judaism, they have these counting of the Omer calendars. Like you can get one off the internet or buy one or make your own or whatever. And they've gotten very complex in the last few years. Now, it doesn't just go linear. They've got it going like in a spiral as you count down. And it's, for me, for my tiny little pin brain, it's kind of hard to follow that. So I like a nice, orderly, linear-looking thing I can follow. You can do it however you want. It doesn't matter. So what we're doing is looking at a calendar and counting day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, 1 Shabbat. So day 8 is 1 Sabbath, 1 week, 1 day. 1 week, 1 day. Then 1 week, 2 days. Then 2 weeks, 1 day. 2 weeks, 2 days, etc. That's how it's done. But the question is, when do we start the counting of the Omer? For almost 40 years, I have believed that we start the counting of the Omer on the first Sunday after Pesach, or after Hagamatzah. Please figure out the difference between Passover and Hagamatzah. They are not the same thing. Even though everybody says, where are you doing Passover this year? We don't do Passover. We haven't done Passover in 2,000 years since there's been no temple. We do Hagamatzah. Hagamatzah is the 7-day feast that they call Passover. Here's the problem. It's called Passover in the New Testament. And that's why everybody calls it Passover, because of the New Testament calls it Passover. Well, guess what? They had a temple then. They could call it Passover. And they were doing Passover, the killing of the lamb, all week. We don't do that anymore. We just have Hagamatzah. So we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this like, when do we start the counting of the Omer? You don't have to believe me on this. It's fine. You can do what you want. You can believe what you want. I have checked it and read it and checked it and studied it and looked at it from every angle. Traditional Judaism starts it on the second day of Hagamatzah, what they call second day of Passover, which is the 16th, always the 16th of Nisan or Aviv, always. However, I don't believe that. I believe that it's the first Sunday, first day of the week, after Hagamatzah. after the first day of Hagamatza, which would make it the first day after the Shabbat, regular weekly Shabbat. So here's where we start. And here's what I wrote in my big book, When All the Pictures Are Restored. I'm going to do a plug for myself, which you can get on my website, michaelwasherart.com. on the page of my writings. So here's what I wrote. Here's one little tiny bit of what I wrote. Obviously, the counting must be from the weekly Sabbath. How else could you count 7 complete Sabbaths? It's simple. Now, when I say it's simple, I don't mean don't be a dummy. It's really easy to see. It's not easy to see at all. But it is a simple concept. If the Sabbath being spoken of here was the Shabbaton, that is the high Sabbath, the 15th of Nisan, the 15th of Aviv, thank you very much. This is my big book, When All the Pictures Are Restored. And in the counting of the Omer and the first fruits chapters is where I deal with this counting of the Omer. When it starts, I deal with it in the first fruits chapter. So there's a Shabbaton, a weekly Sabbath. A high Sabbath. Shabbaton is a high Sabbath, which is the 15th, the day after Passover. Not Hagamatza, Passover. And if it was referring to the Shabbaton, it couldn't say then 7 complete those things, because there aren't 7 Shabbaton there. There's 7 weekly Sabbaths there. So it's a simple concept, but it's not easy to see. Admittedly, it's not. How could we count exactly 7 Sabbaths? We could count 7 weeks, sure, but not 7 Sabbaths, and certainly not 7 Shabbaton. The weeks or Sabbaths must be complete, they must be full. Yes, the word for week and Sabbath are the same. So it could be there shall be 7 complete weeks, and there are 7 complete weeks, not 7 complete Sabbaths. But I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is just because it's the word Shabbat. Now, there's a couple passages in the Bible, especially Daniel chapter 9, that say Shabbatot, plural, Sabbaths, and it means weeks of years. And that's fine. It could be weeks, 7 complete weeks, and it is. But for the beginning of the counting, to nail that down, you got to look at what it says in the Hebrew. Count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, then you count 7 complete Sabbaths. So if the Sabbath being spoken of there was the Shabbaton, you can't have 7 Shabbaton, you have 7 regular Shabbats. So that's why the beginning, anyway, of why I believe, like the Sadducees did in the first century, that the counting of the Omer was on the 17th, which is 17th usually, but not always, but definitely the first day after Shabbat on the week of Hagamatza. All right, so that's my belief. You can believe that or not. That's fine. You can do what you want to do. Now, let's talk about what it means. Why do we do this? What was God after? What does it say in the Hebrew? What is the whole purpose of this thing? You shall count for yourselves. That's really important. From the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day of the Omer of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths, complete or perfect they shall be. Until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, you shall count 50 days. So you start counting the first day after the Shabbat of, right after Hagamatza or Passover, and then you count 7 weeks, and you come to the day after that Shabbat, that 7th Shabbat, and it's the next festival, Shavuot. So there's 2 things here that are very, very important. The first one, it says in Hebrew, uspartem lachem. Uspartem lachem. And you shall count lachem, to you. To you, plural. It's the same word that is said 12 times. It's either 11 or 12 times in Leviticus chapter 11 about they quote kosher laws. It says, this animal, and this animal, and this animal shall be unclean, lachem, to you. That means personal. It doesn't mean a pig is unclean. It means you make it unclean to you or you don't. It's up to you. There's no such thing as unclean food. There's food, and then there's animals that God wants to be unclean to us. And that's as simple as the kosher laws are. They're that simple. Now the same word is used here. You shall count to you, personal. It's supposed to be personal. The rabbi said that this means one should apply the counting of the Omer to oneself. It's a personal act. Now the second thing that's super important here is Shabbatot tamimot. Shabbatot tamimot. Tamim, ot, plural. Shabbatot, Sabbaths, tamimot. Perfect. That's what it means. Tam is perfect. That's what it means. Like when Jacob and Esav are born, one is hated by God. That's what it says in Malachi chapter 1. That God hated Esav. But Jacob he loved. Why? Because it says in Genesis that Jacob was tam. He was perfect. He was a jerk. Don't get me wrong. The guy was a thief. He was a liar. He was a jerk, selfish, brutal. However, in God's sight, he was tam. He was perfect. And it means perfect because it means like something that cannot be added to, filled up. Like it's completely, perfectly full. It can't be added to. It's done. These Sabbaths are supposed to be perfect. Now, the counting of the Omer are processes that's done to barley grain and then done to wheat grain over these 7 weeks. And what are we doing? We're making perfect offering. We're creating a perfect offering. And then that offering, as you can see in this photograph of something that happened a couple of years ago, the priests are throwing the offering into the fire on a makeshift altar that they built in Jerusalem. And that's the end result of creating this Omer, of filling this measure up of an Omer, which we'll talk about how much that is, the volume of that. The end result is to refine it and perfect it and then offer it to God. Well, you're supposed to be doing that lachem, to yourself. So this tells us that the counting of the Omer time period is specifically for you. It's specifically to do something to you. It's specifically for me to be refined and perfected over these 7 weeks. That's what it's all about. So the processes that were done are in the Mishnah, as I said before. And here's what it says in Mishnah Menachot. Menachot means grain offerings or bread offerings. 10:4. 10:4, good buddy. They reaped it and put it in the baskets and brought it to the temple court. The sages say they used to thresh it with reeds and stalks of plants. Now the reason it says the sages say is because that is not normal. That's really weird. So they have to put some weight behind this statement, or else everybody go, oh, that's not how you do that. The sages say they used to thresh it with reeds and stalks of plants so that the grains should not be crushed. And then they would put the grains in a copper tube. The tube was perforated so that the fire should prevail throughout the grains. Then they spread it out on the temple court and let the wind blow over it. Then they put it in a grist mill and removed from it 1/10 of an ephah. Now, 1/10 of an ephah is what we're talking about. It's an Omer, the measure of an Omer. We're counting the Omer, 49 days of counting the Omer. So that's what 1/10 of an ephah is. And that was then sifted through 13 sieves. Now, those are the 5 or 6, if you count the stones crushing it into flour, the 5 processes that were done in the temple to the grain in order to prepare it for this offering. So there's some words here that I didn't know. I heard about them, but I didn't really understand them because I don't know agriculture. Probably very few people do. So here's the vocabulary you need to know. Chaff. What is chaff? Most Christians think chaff is like bad things in your heart. It is. But physically, chaff is the inedible garbage from the plant, from the wheat or barley. And that includes the stalks, the long stalks, and the heads, like the things that are attached to the heads of the grain. There's some stuff that has to come off of the heads. So there's two things that are chaff. The stalks and then the straw that's on the heads. Threshing. Threshing is separating the heads from the stalks. I didn't know that till kind of recently. You have these stalks, you have the heads on top. Well, to separate those heads from the stalk, that's why you thresh. That's why you're threshing. And it can be done with rubbing, just rubbing it in your hands. You can flail it beat it with a stick. You can tread on it. You can, get horses and cows and oxen and people to walk on it, tread on it. You can mash it, like you can stick it in a big tub or something and just mash it. A lot of different ways to thresh. And what does that do? That removes the heads from the stalks. Then winnowing. Now that's separating the grain from the chaff. So you have this head on this long stalk. You pop that off by threshing. Well, then what do? You got to get the garbage off the heads. That's what winnowing is for. So you have harvesting, then you have threshing, and we're just going by what says in the Mishnah. Harvesting, threshing, roasting, winnowing, and then sifting. These are 5 processes that the priest did in the temple with this grain to fill up the Omer. Now let's talk about Ephesians. We're going to start relating the two together. Counting of the Omer and the, quote, 5 gifts. To each one of us, grace or a gift was given according to the measure of Messiah's gift. He led captive a host of captives and gave gifts to men. Now there's 3 words here that are all translated gift, and it's kind of confusing because in Greek it's different from Hebrew. But in Greek, there's 3 different words. The first one, to each of us, grace. Now that's charis, like charismatic, charis. Grace or gift. It's an interchangeable term for gift and grace. So we could say it either way. To each one of us, gift or grace was given according to the measure of Messiah's gift. Now this is a different word, gratuity. Gratuity, which means giving somebody something. It's not charis, it's a different word. He led captive a host of captives. Now he's quoting Psalm 68. He led captive a host of captives and gave gifts. This is a third word. This is a no-cost gift. Just a gift, just a present. It doesn't cost you anything. A no-cost gift to men. So I looked up Psalm 68:18, and it's different. It doesn't say this in Hebrew. It says something like it, but it doesn't say this. So my assumption is you cannot understand Ephesians 4 unless you understand Psalm 68. And that's just to understand what he's saying. That has nothing to do with the counting of the Omer. But in order to understand the basis from which he's speaking, you've got to understand Psalm 68:18. And here's what it says. You have ascended on high. You have led captivity captive. You took a whole bunch of captives with you. You have received gifts among men. Indeed, the rebellious, stubborn, that the God Yah may dwell. It's a very strangely worded passage here in Hebrew. That the God, Elohim Yah, may dwell. That he may dwell, Elohim Yah. God Yah. So what does it say in Hebrew? It says, Lakachta matanot ba'adam. And you take matanot, gifts, in man. That doesn't make sense. You take them in man? So I looked up, I've done this before. I looked up kach. There is no such word as kach. It's lakach, to take. It's one of the only verbs that's only in the to be form, to take. lakach, to take. Well, here it's, and you to take gifts in man. Well, it could be deliver, it could be like turn over, it could be get for somebody. So it's not just give me that. It's not like that in Hebrew. It has various shades of meaning that could also be give, like you got it for me. Like if my friend Doug had gotten something, went and got something, and he gave it to me, I could say he took that for me. He took that to me, and that's okay. And that's basically what it's saying. Lakachat matanot ba'adam, and you took gifts in man. Oh, my little blue thing shifted. That's supposed to be farther down. All right, so here's the nut of what I'm saying. And of course, it's covered up with the, with the bracket. Here's the nut of what I'm saying. The 5 gifts are not what most people think. The 5 gifts are so God can live inside garbage. That's why God gave these gifts. It's so God can live inside garbage, the stubborn. Now, in this verse, Lekach matanot ba'adam, it says, indeed the rebellious, the stubborn, that Elohim may dwell. He put, I'm going to say put instead of took. He put gifts in man, so inside those stubborn, arrogant, foolish people, rebellious people, God can be in there. That's the nut of this teaching. If you want to leave the screen now, or if you know, or if you want to stop listening to the teaching, and you get that, that's good. That's what it's all about. That by learning your gift and by exercising your gift, your personal gift, you then can get to know God, because God will be doing stuff in you and through you. Well, how do you get God to do stuff in you and through you? You got to learn the counting of the Omer. You got to learn these processes that were done to the Omer. And then once you learn your gift and you know your gift, you got it down, you know what it is, then you can exercise it with some wisdom, and you can start to really experience and feel God being in you and speaking through you. I had somebody who listened to the teaching on, one of the teachings that I've been doing on knowing God, and they got tired of hearing verses and verses and verses. They wanted to hear about, my personal experiences of how I get to know God through Judaism. I don't do that much, and I'm not going to do that much. And the reason is, when I went to Temple Mount Sinai for 10 years, it's a Reformed temple here in El Paso, they kept saying this phrase. It just drove me nuts for a long time. They would say, "Oh, that's personal. My relationship with God, that's personal." And it would just drive me crazy. What are you talking about? It's personal. That's all that matters. That's what we should be talking about. Like, how did that happen? Well, I used to be like that. I used to be very verbal about what God was saying to me, and how I was learning, and how I was seeing and feeling and smelling and touching, and how I learned this from Judaism, got that from Judaism. I don't do that anymore. I keep it inside. Why? Because I want to know God. If you want to know God, you're going to have to do that for yourself. I'm sorry, but that's how it works. That's how Judaism works. That God living inside this piece of garbage that I am, I don't have to tell you about everything God says to me and how he touched me and how I, cried for an hour because I saw something or felt something or heard something. I don't need to do that. I need to teach you the scriptures. And if you'll learn the scriptures, and there's a lot of them, it is deep and it's difficult, then you can go off on it your own and have a good time. And you can do all that and have all those amazing experiences. And I say that because God dwelling inside of us, to come to know God over time, I could tell thousands of stories about how God spoke through me or spoke to me through somebody else. I might tell one today. How God spoke through me because I recognized somebody's gift. Once you recognize the gift in people, it's much easier to hear them complain about you or to tell you something's wrong, you know what I mean? Then you can actually hear God talking to you. Especially men, that's your job with your wife. If you're married, that is your job. Your job is to listen to your wife because God speaks through your wife. God speaks through your wife to you. That's the main way that we gain faith, is to live with a wife and children, but mostly a wife who God will speak through them and show us who we really are. So if you're not married, you're at a disadvantage. And it's easier for you, but you're at a disadvantage. You don't get to really experience what married people do who get through it, who get through from one side to the other and actually get to change and grow and have these processes happen to them. So it's harvested, the grain is harvested first, then threshed, then roasted, then winnowed, then sifted. And these processes fill the measure. Fill the measure. Now that measure, it's not very big. You can see here, this is I've highlighted the Omer. The big one is 10 Omers, which is an ephah. This third one, little one, it's only how much is it? Omer, 2.2 liters or 2 quarts. That's all it is. So it's only about that big. And these 2 quarts is what was filled every day for 49 days. And the process is to get them filled. It was very difficult for the grain. I want you to think about that. It was not, like it's putting fire and beating and pressure and rubbing and sifting and all these processes on the grain. Well, if the Omer is one little chunk representing us, which I'll show you, then that means that has to happen to us. That stuff has to happen to us. And that's what I'm saying. To each one of us, gift was given according to the measure of Messiah's gift. He led captive a host of captives and gave gifts to men. Now, the word for gift is usually matanot, which we'll talk about. But let's look at this Ephesians 4 passage and try to parse it out. There's a lot of words here. I don't know why Sha'ul wrote it like this. Maybe he was writing to people that were a lot smarter than us. But I've met very few people, and I'm one of them, who just could not get through this passage. Couldn't figure it out. I was one of them. It took me a long time to actually parse this out for myself to figure out what is being said here. So, Ephesians 4, 10 through 13. And he gave gifts, or matanot, to men, that he might fill all things. Now, already we're right there at counting of the Omer terminology. Remember, he started it with 7 ones. So we're thinking 7. And then he says, and he gave gifts to men that he might fill all things. Filling of the measure. And he gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers. Why? For the equipping of the holy ones, to the building up of the body of Messiah, until we all attain to the knowledge of the Son. We all attain to what? The knowledge of God. That's what it's for. It's so we can know God. All these processes take place so that we can know God. And this is relating the Omer with the 5 gifts. That's what we're doing. How does the counting of the Omer relate to the 5 gifts? And what's it for? Why? So that we can come to the knowledge of the Son of God. We can come to the knowledge of God. Like I've been talking about for the last 4 weeks. To a mature or perfect man. This is the same word in Hebrew, tam, that it says God wants to be counted to us for 7 weeks. What are the 7 weeks supposed to be? Tamim. Perfect weeks. And here he says, till we fill up everything until we come to the knowledge of the Son of God, knowledge of God, to a mature or perfect tamim man, to the measure, oh, now we have the word measure, of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Messiah. We got a lot of clue or key words here. We have gifts, fill all things, a mature or perfect man, the measure of, remember we're counting the measure is what this time period is called. Counting the measure, filling the measure. Filling the measure and counting the Omer. Filling the measure and counting the Omer. To the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness, filling the measure of Messiah. Therefore, if we just kind of trim that down a little bit, that last phrase, measure of the fullness of Messiah. That's what it says. If you just get rid of all the thick forest of words and kind of trim it down to its meaning, we just have the measure of the fullness of Messiah. What's that? Filling the measure of Messiah. Therefore, that little measure, that's the Messiah. That little measure, that little thing, it's a small thing, is the Messiah. And it's counted for 7 weeks. Now, in Exodus 16:16, it says this, gather of it, the manna, every man as much as he should eat. How much should you eat? You shall take an Omer apiece. An Omer. This is the Omer. What was it, 2 quarts? Yeah. 2 quarts. Everybody should gather 2 quarts. And by the way, in that passage later on, it says, it didn't matter how much they gathered. The one who gathered just a tiny bit, all of a sudden, the Omer was full. And the one who gathered a giant bushel full, he ended up with 1 Omer. They all ended up with 1 Omer. Why? So God would force the picture of having 1 man equals 1 Omer. 1 man equals 1 Omer. Yeshua, the Messiah, is 1 Omer. We are 1 Omer. Why? Because we're the body of Messiah. Pretty simple, right? You fill the measure of the body of Messiah. Take an Omer apiece according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent. It doesn't matter how many people there are. Everybody's going to get the same thing, 1 Omer. And God's going to do a miracle to either fill up or scrape off the excess so that everybody ends up with 1 Omer. So God forced Israel to see this amazing picture that, hey, I'm an Omer. I'm an Omer. I'm an Omer. I'm an Omer of grain. In this case, I'm an Omer of manna, the bread from heaven. So this is really an important thing to see this correlation between the counting of the Omer, filling that measure, and the 5 gifts. Because the terminology that he's using for apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers is right out of the filling of the Omer, or the counting of the Omer, or the filling of the measure terminology. It's right out of it. So let's go back and look at it again. They reaped it. They put it in baskets. They brought it to the temple court. The sages say they used to thresh it with reeds and stalks of plants. Now, I have a little picture here of somebody threshing with a little, it looks like a baseball bat. It's some sort of stick or bat. And that could be done, but that's not the normal way to thresh. The normal way to thresh was to have oxen walk over it with these threshing sledges that are huge slabs of wood with nails or some metal embedded in the bottom, or stone or glass embedded in the bottom, to rip and tear and be very violent with these stalks, with these with the grain, which still has the long stalk on it. So you have this long stalk, you have the heads on top. And what do you got to do? You got to remove those heads from the body, from the stalk. Well, they usually did that very violently, but in this case, they did it gently with reeds and stalks of plants. That means like reeds that you find down at the river, and you kind of bind a few of them together, and you make like a bat, very much like this. And then you beat it, and so their rationale was the reeds and stalks of plants so that the grains should not be crushed, so it didn't damage the heads. That's very important. And then they put grains in the copper tube. The tube was perforated so that the fire should prevail throughout all the grains. Now, I had a hard time finding a picture of roasting grain, but I found a roaster, a picture of a grain roaster for all different kinds of grain, and it was open. You could see the side of it, which is kind of cool. It's got a plexiglass side. You can see inside of it. And the fire comes up through the pipe, and it roasts. You know, like when we roast chilies in the Southwest, you just turn that tumbler, very much like that, so that it roasts all of the grain. Because the heads have been separated from the stalks, so you're roasting those heads. The tube was perforated so fire should prevail throughout all. They spread it out on the temple court and let the wind blow over it. Now, that's all it says, but there's a lot to that. It doesn't mean they just kind of got handfuls and they set it down and just, okay, let's wait for the wind to show up and separate. That's not what it is. They would throw it up in the air, just like is done here in this picture of this winnowing going on here. It was thrown up in the air, usually done with a pitchfork or a pitchfork, and then they would like use a fan. They would, make wind. But in the temple, the wind came from God. And so when they throw it up in the air, and I don't know if they use pitchforks or their hands or what, I don't think it really matters, or some vessel. But when it went up and it came down, the wind would blow away the chaff, and the good grain would fall. And this is happening in the temple. Keep that in mind. Then they put that good grain, those good heads that have had the chaff taken away from the heads and had the stalks taken away from the heads first. They put it in a grist mill and remove from it an Omer. Now, that is not done by humans. That is done by stones. The stones would grind it into flour. There's no humans with that. I mean, the humans are moving stones, but that's not human done. That's stone done. And we know that the rock, the stone, is God. So that part, turning it into flour, is not done by humans. It's done by God. And then that flour, now that it's flour, that was put into 13 sieves that got tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter until it was perfect. Until it was perfect. So building up of the body of Messiah until we all attain to the knowledge of the Son of God, to a Adam Tam, an Adam Tam, a perfect man, to the measure, the filling of the measure of the stature that belongs to the fullness, the filling of the measure of Messiah, of the body of Messiah. So these processes are what we're given to teach Israel how to deal with each other and how to build the body of Messiah. Don't think the body of Messiah just kind of occurred after Jesus. That is not true. The body of Messiah has been around since God created Israel. In Isaiah chapter 1, it talks to Israel. God says to Israel, this tribe bites at this tribe, and this tribe eats this tribe, and they pull off an ear, and they pull off a foot, and they eat an arm. It's a body. They eat the body. They're self-consuming carnivores, and what's it called when you eat people? Cannibals. That Israel became cannibals and eating each other. Why? Because Israel is a body of God. And these processes show us how to deal with one another in the body, how to create the body, how to fill the body to perfection. And it hurts. There's not a thing here that doesn't hurt the grain. Now, the only one that's specifically said it's done this way to not hurt the grain is the most violent one, which is beating it. So that's why it was beat in a more gentle way instead of just driving, threshing sledges over it to destroy it. So it was more of a gentle process, but it was still painful for the grain, if grain could speak. So let's look at the two things, the matanot and the 5 processes. The 5 processes are harvesting, threshing, roasting, winnowing, and sifting. Now, in the order it's presented in Ephesians, we have the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, the pastor, and the teacher. It is a different order, but I want you to look at these correlations. If you've never done this before, try to figure out who does the harvesting. Who do you think does the beating of the grain in a gentle way, but the beating of the grain when it first comes into the temple? Who does the roasting? Who puts the fire out to roast every grain? We're laughing because we know who that is. Who does the winnowing? The winnowing, throwing it up in the air and separating the chaff from the good heads of grain. Who does that separation? And then who sifts and sifts and sifts and sifts and 13 times until it's tam, until it is absolutely perfect? Who does that? And which one are you? Because I'm going to show you that you are from birth one of these. Not two, not three. Now you can do all of these, but you aren't all of these. You are one of them. One of the big doctrines going around in the 90s, might still be there in the church, was that the apostle can do all the gifts. That's what the apostle is. They're the ones who can do all four other gifts. No, that's nonsense. They're all very specific, very different in Hebrew. And we're going to examine all five. So I want you to think about this. So there's two different words here and two different concepts that we have to talk about. In the church, they'll say, that guy's an evangelist and he was preaching thus and such. Or they'll say, oh, he's a teacher. No, they'll say, he's a prophet, but he's a good teacher. He's a teacher and a prophet. Or I've been called that. Oh, you're a prophet and a teacher. No, I'm not. I know exactly what I am. And they'll say, oh, that person's a pastor. They're such a good pastor, and they're great teachers. They're a pastor teacher. No, they're not. They're one of them. Everybody's one of them. I'll show you this. You don't have to believe me. I'll show you what I know. You can believe it or not. So let's talk about the difference between the gift and the office. The gift given freely to us, to each one of us, and the office. Now, there are two different words in Hebrew. An officer or a minister is a sharat or a sar. A sar is a minister, a prince, an officer, or a leader. That's a minister. That's somebody who's like who is an office that does a task, that does like the priests could be they would be given this office of going and getting the grain. Or they could be in this office of going outside David's kingdom to go bring David's kingdom outside of David's kingdom to go teach. Or a priest could be given the office of offering the incense offering 1 year. That's an office. That's like a job. That's not a gift. That's not a matan. A matan is a gift or a present that's just given to you. For no reason, just given to you. Now the word grace, which we saw is kind of interchangeable with gift in Greek, gets kind of confusing. We could look at grace or gift as basically the same thing. But in Hebrew, they're different. In Hebrew, matan is just, a present given to you. But grace is chen, totally different word. And it means something big giving to something small. Like a big guy giving something to somebody small. They have to bend down. It means bending down and giving something. Totally different. That's the word grace in English, grace. By grace you have been saved. What's the word charis in Greek? Or chen in Hebrew? Charis. So grace or gracious given thing is slightly different from matan, which is just a present. It's the same concept, but it's slightly different. So my opinion, this is just my opinion, if we were to translate Ephesians 4 into Hebrew, I would use the word matanot for gifts. Matanot. And the reason is, that's what it said in the passage that was quoted in Psalm 68. It said, lekachat matanot ba'adam. Gifts were given. And so then Paul, or Sha'ul, he translates that, and he teaches from it, translates it to the people he was writing to, and he says, that's the counting of the Omer. Him going up to heaven and then giving gifts to garbage people, horrible, rebellious people, so God can dwell in them. So God can dwell in them. Le'asu v'mikdash. Oh, that's not right. Ve'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Build for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in them. Same concept. Ve'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Build for me a sanctuary. Let them build for me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in them. So that's the word matanot, gifts. Now in 1 Corinthians 12, 4 through 7, this can get confusing. We're going to look at two passages in the New Testament which can be confusing. It really can, because the Hebrew culture does not translate cleanly into the Greek culture at all. Everything is upside down and mixed up and mushed up, and it gets really confusing. But we'll look at them. I'll try to make sense of it. 1 Corinthians 12, 4 through 7. Now there are a variety of gifts, that's matanot, but the same Spirit, and the varieties of offices. Now this is the word sarim. Sarim. Offices, sarim. A minister is a sar, plural is, or offices is sarim. Totally different word. There's matanot, there's sarim. And the same Lord, and varieties of effects, but the same God, who works all things in everybody. But to each one is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To each one of us. To each one. Where'd it go? To each one. Same exact verbiage, and same words in Greek, by the way, that it said in Ephesians about the 5 gifts. To each one of us was given. It's very important. So there are matanot, but there's also sarim. I am an apostle. I know I'm an apostle. I mean, I would stake almost everything on that. I just know it. I know it from Hebrew. I know it from Judaism. I know it from so many things in the scriptures. And so many experiences in my life. Once you learn what a shaliach, an apostle is. So, I am an apostle, but I can be in the office, the sarim, I can be in the office, or the sharat, I can be in the office of a teacher. I can be in the office of an evangelist. I can be in the office of a pastor with my sheep. And I can be in a bunch of offices. You say you're a pastor. You can be a pastor at your core and be in the sharat, the office, or function in the office, if you need to, or if God needs you to, of an apostle. And just get something done. Or you can be in the office of a teacher and parse things out like a teacher does. Or you can be in the office of an evangelist and preach, and people get born again. Does not mean that's who you are. It means you're functioning in that office. And they are two completely different things. My wife, who is a prophet, often functions in the office of an apostle, setting things in order, which we'll talk about probably 5 weeks from now. They're two totally different things. And you need to know the difference. Romans 12:6. Since we have gifts, matanot. Now this in Greek is charismata, gifts, but it's matanot in Hebrew. Since we have gifts that differ according to the grace, the charis, the gift given to us, if prophecy according to his faith, etc. So you need to understand, number one, what was done to the grain to fill up the measure. Number two, what the gifts are. Number 3, the big one, you need to learn what your gift is. And then number 4, you need to learn that they are different from the offices and what those offices look like. That means you got to learn all 5 gifts. You got to know all 5 gifts in order to do that. All right, now he says very clearly to each one of us, and I checked it in Greek, and it does say to each of us, yet to all of us was given these 5 gifts for the building up of the body of Messiah. Number 1, harvesting. That is the evangelist. That's the first to go out and harvest or gather. That's what they're driven to do. They're driven to go out and get people born again. That's who they are from their core. I am not that. I'm not. I mean, you can probably tell. I'm not all about being born again. Every single week giving an invitation, which, by the way, is not, as far as I can tell, not scriptural. But that's another story. The evangelist is driven to reach that grain. Go out and gather that grain in. Number 2, threshing. This is weird. Threshing, the one who's the most violent is the pastor. The one who is the most gentle and compassionate. My daughter, Rebecca, is a pastor at her core. She was never happy until she got the job that she fit in, which is a social worker. The social worker was all about, feeling their feelings, and what does she call it? Oh yeah, it's called empathy. I always forget that because I got none. But because that's not my gig. That's not my gift. She is very empathetic, and she can feel people's pain. She can feel it. They don't have to say a word. And there's a lot of people like that. Pastors are like that. They can feel your pain. If you're a pastor, that's your thing, man. You feel people empathetically without a word being said. And that's what drives you to heal them, to fix them, to get them comforted. But look at what their job is. The first one, to beat the stalks off the heads of the grain. Strange, yes? But in a gentle way, in a strange way, a different way that's not usual. Gently beating the heads from the stalks. 3 is roasting. That's the prophet. They open their mouth, fire comes out. And they can try to sugarcoat it, but fire comes out. And they can try to be nice and feel your pain, but fire comes out. And they can try to see wonderful things that are encouraging, and fire comes out. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they do. They wake up in the morning, they go to bed at night, and they dream all night long, and they're a prophet all the time. And it doesn't matter how nice they are, fire's going to come out. And it's submitting. Remember, it says every single grain to the fire. There's no escape from it. Winnowing, the teacher. This is, you throw the grain up, the wind blows away the chaff from the heads, and the good grain falls into a pile, so now you have good grain. It's all about separation. It's all about parsing things out. You may think that's my gift. It's not. I've seen people do this that are like magical. They come up with stuff that I cannot even get my head wrapped around. But to them, it's like waking up in the morning. It's easy. They separate things out. I saw it. I saw it. It was no problem. They carry around highlighters and microscopes and things like that. And they get to the details, and they find all these fine details. You think I'm detailed? I am not a teacher. And I don't teach like a teacher. I teach like my gift, an apostle. But that's how teachers are. And they allow the wind to separate the grain from the chaff. Now, sifting, that's what I am. Repeatedly refining until perfect. That's who I am at my core. Functioning in all these other sharat, that's plural already. Sharat, these offices, acting as a sar, a minister, as a pastor, or an evangelist, or a prophet, or a teacher, that's hard for me. Some of them are harder than others. The pastor is the hardest for me. You may not be like that. That's fine. But you do need to know who you are and what your strengths are. And I'm going to tell you why. Here's the thing. Who did this? Who did this work? Who did this separating? Who harvested the grain? Who was the evangelist who went out and got the grain? Who threshed the grain once it got into the house, into the temple? Who roasted the grain? Who winnowed the grain and separated it out? This is in the temple courts, remember. And who sifted the grain? These were the priests and the Levites. And only the priests and Levites. Nobody else was allowed to do this. Now, this is a book called The Levitical Calling by a friend of mine, Candace Long. And what she is teaching in this book is that your life is hard. That's what the book is about. Your life is hard. Why is your life hard? Because you're creative. Why are you creative? Because you're a priest or Levite. And that's why your life is hard. And she's right. She's absolutely right. But my bottom line, remember, is to get to know God. Why is life so hard? So we can get to know God. Why do things have to be so hard for you as a believer? So you can get to know God. This is one of the things that she says in this book about being a Levite or a priest. There is an unmistakable tenor to Levitical thought and speech, an inner radar for the coming king. We sense the days are short, and all of our attention is focused on his rule on the earth. So like we're thinking about, kingdom, come kingdom, come kingdom. I mean, that's all I ever talk about is the kingdom. Then she says, in the Old Testament, the predominant role of the Levites was to prepare the people for the presence of the Lord who desired to dwell in their midst. And she's quoting this passage from Exodus chapter 25 that says, Ve'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Build for me a sanctuary. Who did that? Who ministered in the sanctuary? The priests and the Levites. Period. And why did God say to do that? So I can dwell in them. That's what she's talking about. To prepare the people for the presence of the Lord who desired to dwell in their midst. And that is absolutely true. You are not a pastor. You are not a teacher. You are not an evangelist so that you can get people saved, or you can comfort the afflicted, or you can get things done, accomplished for God, That's not why. We're doing this so God can have a place to dwell in garbage cans. And it's all about knowing God. This is from the book that changed my life, The Garden of Peace. Men, this is only a book for men. It's written by a Hasidic rabbi in Jerusalem. Women, you're not allowed to read this. Sorry, he wrote one for women. And he says, this is only for men. Women, don't read this. It's going to freak you out. This changed my life because I was never taught from Judaism. And remember, I got born again in 79 in a Messianic congregation, and I've been in Messianic Judaism since then. I've never been in a church. Not really. I don't know church. I don't know that world. And in Messianic Judaism, and in Judaism proper, I was never taught how to treat my wife. I was taught what the bulk of the church teaches. And I won't go into that. And my marriage, because of that, suffered, and therefore I didn't have peace in my home, and therefore I couldn't hear God through my wife, and I couldn't get to know God the way I'm supposed to know God. Well, then I changed that 5 years ago. I got a hold of this book. I would read a paragraph at a time, get mad, and throw it across the room, go back to it, pick it up, read it again, and say, God, what does that mean? How do I do that? And then I'd go through a class every week. Every day, I'd go through a class of God teaching me what was meant in that paragraph of this absolutely phenomenal Rabbi Shalom Arush. Here's one of the things he says. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav teaches that a man's true purpose is to serve God and to walk in his ways. This enables us to recognize God and to get to know him. Get to, not know him, get to know him over time, faithfully doing his will. And then it starts talking about that you can't do that unless you have peace in your home. And men, you can't do that unless you humble yourself and listen to your wife and let God talk to you through your wife and destroy you and rebuild you week after week after week, day after day after day. Then you come to know God over time. Absolute truth. You can believe that or not believe it, but it is true and it changed my life, and I'll be talking more about that. It was the priests and Levites who did the work of refining the Omer, of filling the measure, of counting the Omer. And remember it says, Usfartem lachem, you shall count to you. The rabbi said this means you should apply it to you personally. During these 7 weeks, you count to you. In other words, you're supposed to be learning about the Omer and letting you as the Omer change and have these processes done to you, done to me over these 7 weeks. And then he says, Shabbatot tamimot. They shall be perfect Sabbaths. Or let's say perfected, refined, perfected. The process is done to the barley harvest, and then the wheat harvest is a perfecting or refining. In fact, the harvest and the Omer itself is like this. The barley is rough. It's a very rough grain. It's usually used just to feed animals. But it was used for the harvest, for filling the measure, for the beginning of the 7 weeks. But as the 7 weeks went on, by the time it got to the middle and then about 2/3 of the way through, barley was done and the wheat came up. And now all the rest of the Omer is wheat. Wheat is refined. It's cleaner. It's better for making bread and flour. So the Omer itself is a refining. It starts out rough and it gets more and more refined as it goes on. And all of this is about Lada'at et Adonai, know the Lord. And I remember I said that knowing the Lord, I said this last week, knowing the Lord is not you wake up because you got born again and you know God. You don't. We don't. We get to know him over time. Ephesians 4:13, until we all attain to the unity of the faith. It takes time. It takes processes. And the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to a perfect man, to a measure of the stature of the fullness of Messiah. You are going to suffer. You are. There is not a single thing that God says that is good. There's not a single prophecy in the Bible that's good. They all start out bad. All of them. I'll talk about this when I'm talking about the prophet. Every single one of them starts out bad. Now, they resolve at the end of many of them to be fantastic, but they're only fantastic because it's talking about the kingdom of God coming and how magnificent it's going to be for Israel. But other than that, it's bad. And the reason is we're bad. We don't know God. We're not like God. We are garbage. We're the rebellious. I got to go back and look at what that word is. Oh, I don't have it here. I can't remember what it is. The rebellious, the stubborn. That's who we are. And in order for God to live inside this garbage can, something's got to happen. And that's what it's all about. That's what Judaism is all about. Judaism refines us. Judaism changes our soul, not our spirit. Our spirit is perfect when we're born again. But that doesn't mean we're good. Our souls are still a mess. They're horrible. And so we are given these 7 weeks to become perfect. I teach middle school. So you know what they say when I say that. Now, oh, this composition is perfect. You know what they say. Nothing's perfect, mister. Nothing's perfect. Oh, that's perfect. What you did there in repeating those 3 colors, perfect. Nothing's perfect. No, you missed that. You weren't looking at the shape there. It's not good. It's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. Yeah, there is perfect in this world. Every time we're doing Judaism, and Judaism talks to us, for that moment, it's perfect. We're perfect. We're reflecting heaven. We're reflecting God. That's perfection. So don't think, like the Gentile world, nothing's perfect. Yeah, there is perfect. And when we're reflecting the perfect that will come, which is the kingdom, we're perfect. Well, during these 7 weeks, the goal of it is that when we get to Shavuot, we're able to understand all the stuff that happened to us during these 7 weeks, make changes, refine our soul, our nefesh, our neshama, refine our soul, and become perfected, at least in a small way. And then Colossians 1:10, we're talking about knowing God is a process. You don't wake up in the morning and know God because you're born again. It's a process, like marriage. Colossians 1:10, walk in a manner worthy of the Lord to please him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing. That means getting more, getting better, getting more in the knowledge of God, increasing in the da'at Elohim, the knowledge of God. La da'at et Adonai, to know the Lord. God's desire is for us to know the Lord. It is a process. Increasing in da'at et Adonai. So, I want you to be thinking about this as we're teaching. We're going to start going into the 5 gifts next week. This is just an intro, so you can know what I'm teaching. And the whole process, the whole bottom line, is so we can be tam, more and more tam, perfected and perfected and perfected, so we can come to know God better. And by the way, you don't have to share this with anybody. You don't have to tell people about what God is doing in you to change you. Just change. And then when they ask, you can answer. Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. The verse says, Hinei Hashem, well, actually, the verse in 1 Kings 8:27 says, Hinei Hashemayim u'shmei Hashemayim lo yachalklucha afki habet hazeh. Behold, the heavens and highest of heavens, they cannot contain you. How much less this garbage can. Solomon was talking about this amazing, glorious house of God, but even that is just a garbage can compared to heaven. Asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Hinei hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim lo yachalklucha. Hinei hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim afki habet hazeh. Make me a sanctuary. I will dwell in them. Make me a sanctuary. I will dwell in them. The heavens and highest of heavens, the heavens and highest of heavens cannot contain you. How can this house Asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Asu li mikdash Shachtanti It is crazy to think that God, the God of Israel, could dwell in this garbage can. I mean, it's just absurdity if you think about it. But that's God's ultimate goal for you and for me, is for him to dwell in us so we can get to know him. So go start studying and see if you can figure out what your gift is and what your job on this planet is to help fill the measure. I hope this has been good for you, and Shabbat Shalom.